not feel that way, but without the dieting part. So yeah, so I think it was more just like, I did not want to struggle the way I saw everyone else struggling. And I figured I could figure out a way how, I guess.
So you went to school for nutrition, but you went to school to be a registered dietitian.
Yes.
Is that correct? So
yeah,
that is a pretty focused, I would believe it's a pretty focused industry and degree. But then I know you're also certified intuitive eating counselor. So this is where I think gets confusing, because I have the same, we're so interesting that we're having this conversation, because I still fall into the category of like, it's good, it's bad. It's fat free, it's low fat. My brother does paleo, my sister does blah, blah, blah. This one does, no carbs, and growing up as well, my parents were never heavy, but my dad was always watching his weight, and he would do Atkins. That was like the big thing. He'd do Atkins and he'd lose a bunch of weight, and then he would quit smoking, but then he'd go back to smoking, and then he'd gain weight, and then, so it was a something. So I knew there was a way to control food, and I knew there was a way, again, another diet. I'm just using Atkins as an example, but
that was the first diet I'd ever went on.
Really? I remember my dad like walking around with that little book. And it was like it was like the best thing in the world. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
like the carb counting book or something like that.
Exactly. And now there's so much. But it's so difficult because our culture is all about what's good, what's bad. And then you have to have you have to have this certain BMI in the certain chart. Like, I look at those charts and I'm just like, okay, are these real? Like, does that take into account the 23-year-old and the 50-year-old? No, it just takes into account the woman. And you look at this big chart, and then, the other sad part is there's so much obesity on the planet. There's so much obesity in the United States. There's, I was just traveling recently, and there were people struggling to get on a plane. There were people struggling to walk. They had, we were actually, my husband and I were in Orlando, and they're more than not, people that were morbidly obese were on the scooters because they couldn't walk, because now they have so many disabilities from the weight. So that, then it's like another whole gamut we can get into. But how did you find, or did you feel called to this intuitive eating? So how did that come about?
It took me a long time to come about that. And so when I started, I was so lucky to work with, when I started working as a personal trainer, once I really kind of took that on as like a full-time or more full-time job, I was like in college and I was working part-time then. And then when I graduated, I started working for this woman full-time. Her and I are still really good friends. Her name is Colleen. And I felt like she was one of the first people in my life who like I had just kind of met. She didn't know me my whole life, and she really helped me understand that like my intuition was a strength, and that like it didn't really matter like how many letters or credentials I had after my name. Was that like the fact that I was able to kind of work with someone and help them just using, obviously using my knowledge too, but using my intuition was helping people. And it wasn't about like opening a book and being like, oh, your knee hurts, let's do X, Y, and Z to fix your knee. It was more about like, well, what else is going on? Like, can we take like the whole person into account? And I feel like as I started integrating like more nutrition into my practice, and once I got my registered dietitian certification or license, I realized that so much about like what I was doing was behavioral, and but people still wanted the plan. Like they wanted the diet, they wanted like the paleo, the Atkins, like how many calories should I eat every day? And I felt like, again, this was like me being like, okay, should I be a people pleaser and just give the people what they want? Or can I use my intuition and also help these people tap into their intuition to figure out what their body needs? And I didn't know anything about intuitive eating at the time. So I was just struggling to like find the language and find the methods to do this like on my own for years. And I really struggled with it. It was really hard because I had like no tools as a practitioner. And then I found intuitive eating, and it was like everything clicked and everything just like made sense. And then I started helping people more with this like these concrete intuitive eating tools. It's weird. I feel like my intuition kind of like bring me to intuitive eating.
Right. So you listened to yourself, that you felt there was a need out there to have not a better way, but I guess listen to yourself in how to eat and how to take care of yourself, rather than it has to be this, A, B, or C. Right. And so using your own intuition and then helping people to connect to theirs. I mean, that's what it sounds like. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, I shouldn't say very little. I've tried to understand a little bit of intuitive eating. I've always struggled, I'd say, with my weight. I've always been, I've never, it's not like I was up 100 pounds, down 100 pounds, but, I've always struggled with the 15, 20, and I've been on every diet known to man. Mm-hmm. And I went through a period where, okay, I'm going to just eat whatever feels good to me today. And, for me, I guess I'm just like the all or nothing person. After a day, I didn't have a plan. The plan was no plan, and that was not good. Yeah. But I know that that's not the way. I should have, reached out and got more support. So tell me about the people that are listening right now that are saying, but I want to be healthy and I don't want to be on a plan, like let's say a diet plan, one of these shakes or bars or whatever you want to call it, whatever. Not that they're bad, just saying. Yeah. How do I go about intuitive eating? How do I go about how I feel? Like, what if I want to have a bagel? Like, is that good or bad, or is there no good or bad? So share with us.
The first thing I always like to kind of let people know is that intuitive eating is not about weight loss. So I think a lot of times people are like, oh, great, here's this other thing I can try that's going to help me lose weight. What I often tell people is that when you really embrace an intuitive eating practice, your body will probably stabilize at a weight that it feels most comfortable at. Unfortunately, sometimes that weight is higher than like our superficial selves might want it to be. And people might think like, oh, that's unhealthy, or that's, what isn't that going to make me unhealthy if I'm like a higher weight than I am right now? And I always like to just automatically, like before even getting into the information, debunk that, and say that the research really supports that your health is really dictated by your habits, not by the weight that you are. So you could fall into an overweight or obese category and practice intuitive eating and practice movement and getting enough sleep and drinking enough water, all of those things that we need to kind of feel good and still be as healthy as someone who is a lower weight than you. So I always like to just kind of like start with that. Because I think that that's something that people always freak out about is like, oh, am I going to gain weight from intuitive eating? And the truth is like, yeah, you might gain weight, you might lose weight, you might not change your weight at all. So those are your three options. Those are your body's three options. And then the second thing people always think is that intuitive eating is just like, well, I can eat whatever I want, like however much I want and whenever I want. And I think it is kind of like that, but I always say that the practice is about doing things that are going to support your body's intuition versus things that are going to kind of deter it and set it up on a track to like exacerbate these unhealthy habits. So for instance, like we were saying, sleeping, if you don't get enough sleep at night, like your body's naturally going to crave more food and it's going to, probably crave higher sugar foods just to get your hormones to regulate again. So doing things like sleeping and exercise and hydrating are ways to kind of support your body's intuition. It does also involve giving yourself unconditional permission to eat, which freaks people out. Like, do you get freaked out when you hear that?
I do. I kind of do. I'm listening to that and I'm trying to take it in, but there's a part of me that goes, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think if it like, so a lot of the research shows that if you deprive yourself of something, and a lot of diets now, or a lot of programs, whatever you want to call them, like a diet is a diet is a diet to me, will really kind of advocate for eliminating a certain food group, like eliminating dairy, eliminating sugar, eliminating whatever, only eating this much blah. And studies have shown that the more that you do that, the more deprive yourself, the more you end up craving that item, and the more likely you are to overeat or binge on that particular food when you get in contact with it. And I think that's something that so many people can relate to. Like, how many times have you gone like a week without sugar, and then like on day 8, you're like, give me all the donuts?
Oh no. I mean, that's a very big pattern of mine. I'll go and, take out, I'll use carbs, for example. I did a program diet, whatever you want to call it. And it was like no carbs or very little carbs. I don't want to say no carbs. And, you're doing good when you're in it. But the minute then it's like, you want them so badly because you didn't have them. So then I overdid them because it's almost, it's like deprivation. It's
right.
Like, I'm never going to have them again. So I better have a whole bunch and fill up, because the next day, I'm going to feel so bad that I'm going to not have them again. It's like this, your mind goes into this feeling that it's also the thing is like the bad, good thing, So if you're on this diet and you're doing good without the sugar or doing good without the carbs, and then you slip up or whatever you want to call it, you're normal. And then you go, oh, I'll just go off for the weekend. Well, now your body's like, yay. And you feel like you're never going to get it back. So it's like this constant fight. Yeah. It's really exhausting, actually.
Yeah. And that's what I love so much about the practice is that, like, so one, it's unconditional permission to eat, and which might feel nuts to people when they first get started. Right. And so that's why I always recommend having some support, because maybe you don't start one day just saying, okay, I'm going to give myself unconditional permission to eat. Because then you might have those feelings of out of control. And if you're still attaching that like morality to food, like, oh, this is bad, it might send you in like a downward spiral, because that's just what you're conditioned to do in those situations. Whereas, if you have some support, you might be able to slowly start adding things back in and really talking about, like, how did I feel after I ate that? Did I eat enough to feel satisfied, or did I eat so much that I felt sick? How can we kind of set you up to have a more positive experience next time? And that's like really what the beginning of that practice is like trying to have more positive experiences with food. So one way to do that is really simple. It's like something I always try and get people started on right away, is having consistent meals throughout the day. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, and like maybe a couple of snacks in between, instead of skipping breakfast, having like a green salad for lunch, and then feeling out of control at dinner, and ends with like almost every woman I ever talked to, where I'm like, okay, you're not binging, you just didn't eat breakfast. So if you can do things that really support your body's biology, it's a lot easier to tap into your intuition. And then with that, you work to kind of stop looking at foods as good or bad. There are some foods that, we're not going to say that broccoli is as healthy as a Snickers bar. Like, we know that those two things are not nutritionally equal, but they can be emotionally equal.
So one of the things I keep hearing you saying is a practice. And, I'm a yoga teacher and I teach meditation. So these are all, and Reiki. So the energy, all of those are all practices. And you keep saying that, and it's starting to click that it's not just a one-time thing. And it's not like it's a practice, not a perfect. So it's being really kind to yourself. And I think that's another part of the intuition that you have to, it's really the mindset, right? Because you're changing the mindset of how your relationship with food is. I think the majority of women, even though if they were really honest, it's the relationship with food over the weight. And I'm wrong, but I'm thinking that if majority of people had a better relationship with food, then they would have a better relationship with their body. And then, hence they wouldn't have all these dieting crazies. But it's this, I don't know where it comes from, obviously growing up in society, we can go on and on. and looking a certain way and all of that. So when you change it into your mindset and you make it a practice, that intuitive eating is a practice, because it's like meditation. I guide meditation during the week where I am, and I get this all the time. As a matter of fact, on Saturday I had this, and it was very frustrating